So again, I was saying a very special welcome to you, Marcy, who your kind gift enabled the creation of this chair, and to Jason Wilder and Claire Aslan and everyone else. So the Olajos-Goslow chair was created to pursue innovative and collaborative approaches to conservation and conservation science. And in my current position as the holder of the chair, I have pursued integrating my international networks, insights, and expertise with the conservation challenges facing the US Southwest. Now, this afternoon, you will hear from graduate students working in the Southwest, working globally, and tackling issues facing inclusive conservation in our region and elsewhere. We have 7 speakers, excellent speakers, and we only have an hour and a bit. So the speakers will go back to back, and there will be, after Marcy's closing remarks, there'll be time for some questions to a whole panel. And we have some lovely catering, brownies and coffees and teas for this cold day, so we can mingle afterwards and ask questions. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Emily Wren, who's doing her PhD on strengthening coexistence with Mexican wolves here in the Southwest. And Emily's also working with me on an IUCN World Conservation Union task force I started on strengthening human-wildlife coexistence around protected and conserved areas. So on that note, Emily, welcome. We look forward to hearing you.
Great. So hopefully you can hear me okay, but thank you, Duan, for setting this up for us. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my PhD dissertation research on improving the human capacity to coexist with Mexican wolves. So a little bit about myself. I have my bachelor's and master's in wildlife biology, and I was working as the executive director of the Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, which is a nonprofit. We were doing a lot of public outreach and education about Mexican wolves. And then I also have been working as the translocation and coexistence coordinator for a nonprofit called Habitat Harmony for many years, in which I do a lot of Gunnison's prairie dog translocation work in areas away from conflict with humans or development sites to reestablish wildland colonies for eventual black-footed ferret release sites. And that led me back to NAU and the School of Earth and Sustainability to do my PhD. So a little bit of background about Mexican wolves. They are a federally protected endangered species. They were eradicated from the US, Southwest, and Mexico by the 1970s. And then a captive breeding program was started from just 7 individuals that were left to save the subspecies from extinction. They were reintroduced into the wild back in Arizona and New Mexico in 1998. So they are considered one of the most endangered and genetically imperiled subspecies of the gray wolf in the world. We consider wolves a keystone species because of their important ecological role that they play in the ecosystems in which they occur. And currently, the Mexican wolf population is growing in size as well as in geographic range. So right now we have our first pack of wolves, of Mexican wolves, just outside of Flagstaff on the National Forest. So that's exciting. And ultimately, humans' willingness to coexist with Mexican wolves on the landscape is essential to their long-term recovery. This is just an overview map of the core reintroduction area in the US Southwest. I won't go into a lot of detail, but you can see this is kind of the main area where they've been reintroduced. And then they're starting to expand out into suitable habitat. And so with that comes also people learning, once again, how to share the landscape with these carnivores. And this is the area where I'm focusing most of my research on Mexican wolves. So for the first chapter of my dissertation, I'm doing a document review and qualitative analysis of all of the Mexican wolf coexistence programs in the first 25 years since the reintroduction program began. So that's looking at programs such as like compensation for livestock losses, incentive programs, various things like that. And then trying to do a transparent and systematic review of those programs so that we can make recommendations for how they can be improved as they expand in scope. For my second project, I'll be doing a landscape scale genetic model for Mexican wolves. So this is trying to model simulations of genetic connectivity and barriers to their movement across the landscape and simulate different policy scenarios so that hopefully we can kind of understand what the genetic makeup will look like in the future. Then for my third project, I'll be partnering with the US National Parks to understand how they're dealing with human-wildlife interactions and coexistence in national parks. For this project, it's a case study for the IUCN WCPA task force that Duan mentioned, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the World Commission on Protected Areas. And under the WCPA, there is what's called the Green List standard for sites that want to achieve that status. And they go through a process of application and criteria where they're independently verified with benchmarks for biodiversity conservation, things like that. So within this task force, we're trying to create guidance for the standard on human-wildlife coexistence, and then taking lessons learned from US National Parks to apply as a case study and improve our guidance going forward. And then for my fourth project, I'll be looking at using community science to promote carnivore coexistence and conservation. And so this project's still in development. I've been talking with US National Park partners about looking potentially at communities surrounding national parks and incorporating community science as a way to increase engagement and support for human carnivore coexistence. And we've also had some initial conversations with members of the White Mountain Apache tribe about potentially looking at community science for monitoring of Mexican wolves in the Southwest. So that's still a work in progress, and hopefully it'll come together in the next year. So just in summary, we know that social conflicts between people over the recovery of wildlife, especially controversial and challenging wildlife such as wolves, are actually much more common than the human-wildlife conflicts on the ground. But we rarely address those social conflicts about people and their opinions over how wildlife are reintroduced and managed. So I'm hoping through my research to find solutions that will bring people together to improve the coexistence, specifically with Mexican wolves here in the US Southwest, but also apply those lessons learned to global human-wildlife coexistence situations and bring those global insights back to the US Southwest. So with that, I just want to thank you, of course, my advisor and committee members, and the Olajos-Goslow chair for financial support, and then partners, my research. So, thanks.
I will introduce Virginia Nyamu, our next speaker. Virginia is originally from Kenya, but she is for a PhD registered at Stellenbosch University in South Africa through a partnership I've established there. So Virginia works on rangeland restoration and rangeland conservation, a key priority in Africa and much of the rest of the world, including here in the US Southwest. Virginia.
Thank you so much, Duan, for that introduction. As he said, my name is Virginia Nyauma, and I'm currently a student at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and also an adjunct here at Northern Arizona University. So as he said, I'm originally born and raised from Kenya, and it's my first time in the US, and it's a lot of firsts for me today. It's my first time seeing snow, so I'm pretty much excited. And yeah, so just to start, because of time, I apologize for some of the photos of the poor quality, because there are photos that I was taking with my phone, and sometimes the quality wasn't such that good. But basically, from the photo I have in my introduction will speak about what I'll be speaking about today, because you can see cattle, a herder, and you can see vast lands of shrubs and grasses, which is basically what we define as rangelands. And my topic will be about assessing community-based rangeland stewardship programs in Africa. So just a little bit about myself. So that's a photo of myself adorning a traditional Maasai attire which is one of our rangeland pastoralist communities in Kenya, and it's spread across different parts of Kenya, which will be also one of the key areas of my research. And in my professional background, I have both a master's and a postgraduate diploma in monitoring and evaluation, and I've worked in the research and monitoring and evaluation space for a number of years before I started my PhD. And I've been able to work with different conservation NGOs, both in Kenya and which work across Africa, and they focus on conservation, climate justice, and rural development. And just to emphasize before I start, it's just one of the key things that I consider as a core value of myself is the desire to create a more equitable and sustainable world that is guided by the principles of fairness, transparency, and respect for human rights. So just to start, to introduce rangelands from the map, which is there. From the green, actually, rangelands are categorized in very many categories. We have forests, we have deserts, we have tundra, we have woody, and we have herbaceous rangelands. But when you look at the gray is the areas which is not considered as rangelands. And when you look at Africa, the gray is so little. So all that other land is considered as rangelands. And when you come to the US, when you focus on the US Southwest, you can see that at the US Southwest is also, most of it is actually covered in rangelands, which combined globally, you can be able to see that over 54% of the world is actually covered by rangelands. And of course, we know the importance of rangelands. They are useful for grazing, agriculture, and economic activities. But why do we need to be able to protect these rangelands? That's why we have rangeland management approaches. And these approaches recognize that rangelands are social ecological systems whereby we can't just talk about outcomes for people without also talking about outcomes for nature. Because in reality, both of them are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. And that's why we have different strategies which have been brought up, like ecosystem-based conservation and community-based natural resource management, which promote biodiversity preservation while supporting livelihoods. And we also have integrated conservation and development projects, which are able to balance conservation goals with economic empowerment. And also, just speaking a little bit about this photo, I also took this photo just when doing one of the drives during my fieldwork for my master's. You can be able to see this is just cattle grazing together with wildlife. And why I'm bringing this out is because when we talk about rangeland management, we need to also recognize that we can't just bring in the scientific without acknowledging the traditional, whereby this is a local community. This is the way of life, you know. Even before we came in, their livestock have been able to graze together with the wildlife, and they've been able to have their own traditional ways of conserving and protecting rangelands. But now there is the need to also now bring in the scientific, because we clearly understand the nature of the rangeland deterioration, which is currently happening in the world. But now, just moving now to the focus of my PhD research, I'll be focusing on Herding for Health, which is an integrated rangeland management approach currently being spearheaded by Conservation International and Peace Parks Foundation. And it's currently being run in a number of countries in Africa, from Kenya, Botswana, South Africa, Madagascar, and I think also Zimbabwe. So for Herding for Health, it integrates both the traditional knowledge with modern science to be able to restore rangelands, conserve biodiversity, and conserve and improve livelihoods through those 6 pillars which are there. That is support for livestock management, training training herders, building market readiness for communities, and facilitating knowledge sharing, and creating and improving community governance structures, and establishing systems to monitor the impacts of wildlife, rangelands, and livestock. So for my research, I'll be doing my research in 3 countries. That is Kenya within the Chulu Hills and the Masai Mara, and also Botswana within Gamiland, and also in South Africa in the Kruger to Canyon biosphere region. So for my research, I'll be focusing on 3 main research questions, whereby for the first question, I'll be looking at the aspect of how rangeland management is able to affect livelihood outcomes for communities, particularly in terms of empowerment for women and youth. And on my second question, I'll be looking at the extent the implementation of these programs are able to foster social cohesion, governance, and support for sustainable rangeland management. And on my final question, I'll be tackling the issue of innovative finance mechanism and how they are able to relate to rangeland stewardship and conservation for the communities that are implementing rangeland management programs. And finally, for my research, one of the key things is once I am able to finalize my research, I'll be able to present my findings to tribal groups and ranchers within the US Southwest. Because when you look, as I've said, rangelands are not only in Africa, and some of these insights can be borrowed as lessons of learning and collaborations to different areas within the US. And finally, I want to thank, of course, my supervisors from Stellenbosch, Dr. Alta DeVos, Duan, and Anna, and also the main funding for my PhD, which is the Olajos-Goslow Chair within Northern Arizona University and Conservation International, which provide the data, which will be providing the data for my research. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Ana Maria Araya Castro. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. She is originally from Costa Rica, and she is here at NAU on a Fulbright scholarship doing a master's degree. So welcome.
Thank you very much for the intro, Duan. And thank you everyone for being here. Okay, I'm going to be telling you about my thesis research, but I'll start with a little bit about me. Well, I'm from Costa Rica. I did my undergrad degree in geography at the University of Costa Rica. Now I'm doing here my master's program in environmental sciences and policy. Thank you to a Fulbright scholarship. I'm passionate about addressing agricultural and environmental challenges, particularly in the Latin American region, by supporting collaborative processes, policy development, and geospatial technologies. And in between my undergrad degree and what I'm doing now, I was working in different projects regarding these topics. But right now I'm working on my research. What I'm trying to do is to assess socio-ecological vulnerability of farmers and the impacts to drought and how they are adapting to these changes, especially focusing on ecosystem-based adaptation measures. So to have some context, Costa Rica faces high vulnerability to extreme weather with climate projections showing that's going to be a reduction of rainfall and higher temperatures, which strongly impact agriculture. So drought in Cartago province has caused significant economic losses, underscoring the need of actually reducing farmers' vulnerability. Cartago province is the region where I'm focusing on. I'm going to show you a little bit about it in the next slide. But I'm also trying to see if the farmers are implementing ecosystem-based adaptation techniques, as I was telling you. And these adaptation techniques are very important to adapt to drought and climate change because they benefit both livelihoods and the environment. So this is the region that I'm working on. As you can see, the north of the region is national parks and volcanoes, which are very important in this kind of landscape because they shape the landscape, and also is the responsible process of having such fertile lands in this region. So in this process, I'm seeing agriculture as a socio-ecological system. And this is useful to understand the dynamic interactions between social and ecological components, acknowledging the complexity, uncertainty, and interconnectedness of these components. So the methods that I've been implementing for my thesis basically have been first conceptualize agriculture as a socio-ecological framework. Then I moved to the data collection part where I'm like analyzing relevant policy for this context. I'm also working with drought and climate data. And during the summer, I conducted interviews to key actors of the region and also to farmers. And right now I'm moving towards the data analysis process, but I'm doing a thematic analysis using the software in Vivo. So I wanted to share a little bit about the preliminary results that I've been getting, especially from the farmers' interviews and their perception. So to mention some of the challenges that they have been facing, they say that in the region there's unequal water access, there's minimal governmental support, there's low farmer cooperation, there's strong market competition and open market to imports when there is actual products in the region. There's climate variability that they acknowledge that it's been affecting them, mainly because of the unpredictable patterns and because there's been extreme dry and wet periods. I'm focusing on the dry periods. But this ends up in very water-stressed crops that are prone to diseases and to pests. In terms of farm management, on their perception, there's been a very high agrochemical use in the region. This to alleviate the poor soil conditions because of intensive agriculture for such a long period, and also to make plants more stronger to drought. There's also a limited drought-resistant crop adoption due to market constraints. And some other issues I was not expecting to find is that there's been money laundering in farming in the region, and also agrochemical smuggling due to restrictions, mainly bringing agrochemicals from Panama because Costa Rica has very strong restrictions in these terms. In terms of adaptation, farmers have been reducing cultivation areas and adjusting planting and harvesting times due to these impacts caused by droughts or these changes affecting them and their livelihoods. In terms of ecosystem-based adaptation measures, farmers have been creating soil conservation trenches, water harvesting projects, and spring protection. They've been trying to use more organic fertilizers, or at least a mix of organic and chemical fertilizers. They have been implementing hedgerows of native species, and even though agroforestry is not feasible in the region, they try to protect forest patches or at least individual trees because of their cultural and environmental value. And in general, they acknowledge the impacts. They know that they have been affected by drought, but they also recognize that sometimes they are vulnerable because of the external factors affecting them and that they cannot control. And I think here's where the value of using a socio-ecological system approach is, because you can actually take in consideration a lot of other factors that you wouldn't with a very single approach. And what I'm expecting in what's left from my process, because I'm already in my second year, so I'm hopefully finishing my thesis soon, is to see the complexity of vulnerability as a socially constructed process that is influenced by socio-ecological factors that rise across groups. I also want to see how the policy is affecting the region, how the governance in Cartago affects farmers, drought vulnerability through political and cultural factors, and also to see the value of farmers' insights and farmers' perspective on adaptation strategies to inform the feasibility of these drought responses. And to finish, what insights does this research brings to the southwest of the US? I think assessing farmers' vulnerability as a socio-ecological system is very valuable for this region as well, because as I was telling you, it helps you address more components and see the interconnectedness of these components. There's a common ground that it's clear, which is drought that is happening in this region as well, and agriculture as one of the main activities in the region. So it is important to recognize these ways of adapting, and that can be shared within this with this region and the country. And lastly, I think ecosystem-based adaptation measures can reduce soil erosion, can reduce water scarcity and habitat loss, supporting biodiversity. And also it's very important to acknowledge that sustainable agriculture and agroecology can also work as a conservation connectivity measure, especially in areas that are surrounded or very close to national parks, as the region I'm working on in Costa Rica, and also is valuable for the Southwest. And lastly, I want to acknowledge or thank the Technology Research Initiative Fund for funding my fieldwork. I want to thank my advisor and my committee members, also the farmers and key actors for opening up and sharing their struggles, their challenges, and their life. And also to the Resilient Conservation Lab and Dr. Duan Biggs for letting me be part of your meetings and to have this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Meredith Grady. Meredith started her PhD this fall at Arizona State University's Center for Biodiversity Outcomes through a partnership we have established with them. And so welcome, Meredith.
And thanks, everyone. So again, my name is Meredith, and I'm a first-year PhD student. So like Dewan said, I'm only in the first few months of my PhD. So I don't have data or results to share with y'all today, but I will introduce you to my current research and my future interest at a high level. And broadly, my research focuses on bridging different knowledge systems through interdisciplinary and community-based approaches for more inclusive and effective conservation. And the experiences and thinking that led me here was in large part from the place you see in this photo here. And this is a view from a bush camp in Samburu County in northern Kenya on the Owasanyura River. And the relationships I made there and the things I learned really opened my eyes to different ways of knowing and its importance for more inclusive and effective conservation outcomes. But before I dive too deep into that, let me back up and provide you a little bit of background on my journey to this point. All good. All right. So out of undergrad, I started my career as a wildlife biologist surveying water birds on the coast of North Carolina. And then in 2015, when bird flu hit, I shifted to wildlife disease ecology, and I was able to work globally on various zoonotic disease projects, including rabies in mongoose in Puerto Rico. And this kind of work really got me more interested in the social science aspects of ecology and biology. So I shifted to conservation social science during and after my master's studies. And my thesis focused on conservation and development, but specifically I examined the ethics of foreign-led research in communities on the boundaries of protected areas in a biodiversity hotspot in northern Kenya. And that was illustrated in my photo in the title slide there. And then most recently, I've been living and working in Kenya, working on international development and small-scale agriculture. And this is really where I fell back in love with research. And ultimately, all of that has led me here to Arizona, pursuing my PhD. So I'll jump in and tell you a bit more about my research now. So my research is currently focused on two broad issues. And the first is that global biodiversity is declining at a rate that's unprecedented. And this is despite extensive research reaffirming its importance to the health of our planet and society. And I mean, in fact, as you can see here, there's been nearly a 70% decrease in monitored wildlife populations in the last 50 years. So some scientists attribute this to the lack of our discipline to generate actionable knowledge, while others suggest it could be a deeper problem of maybe the exclusion of knowledge and diverse perspectives from the field. So this leads me to my second issue, which is that conservation has historically lacked a plurality of knowledges, especially to address the extinction crisis. And the discipline has often marginalized non-Western knowledge systems, such as indigenous knowledge, that from the global South. And it's also undervalued practitioner or field-based knowledge, compared to theoretical expert knowledge. So for those reasons, the aim of my current research is to understand where we can expand and push those epistemic boundaries of the scientific discipline of conservation to include bodies of knowledge that are relevant to a happier and healthier planet, but have traditionally been excluded. And to examine this more deeply, I'll be using the Endangered Species Act, right? And I'm going to refer to that as the ESA, so I don't have to say that whole word for the rest of this presentation. Right, so the ESA applies to both domestic and foreign species, and it is it has powerful implications for the protection of species and their habitats in the U.S., as well as trade and development restrictions, particularly for foreign species. And for my research, we're studying the about 79 species that have been delisted due to recovery to date. So with this data and with this methods, first, I'm analyzing recovery plans and delisting determinations using inductive coding to explore what knowledge has informed conservation science. And then we'll conduct semi-structured interviews with scientists and practitioners actually involved on the ground using a snowball sampling method, which will identify knowledges that were or were not included in the scientific documentation, but were deemed important for recovery practices and outcomes. And so far, the Apache trout is a case study from this research and super relevant, especially to the state we're in right now. This species is important to the White Mountain Apache tribe, who led efforts in listing the Apache trout in the ESA and led efforts that far predate the ESA itself. And this is also the state fish of Arizona. And after half a century of recovery efforts, the Apache trout was delisted due to recovery just a couple months ago. And this quote from Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior, emphasizes how this recovery was a collaborative conservation effort and it was grounded in indigenous knowledge. So our research and case studies like this will help us understand how collaboration and bridging knowledges for species recoveries might challenge existing frameworks in conservation and help us know what implications this might have for future recovery strategies, as well as the evolution of the discipline of conservation in general. So lastly, as I said, I'm very early in this, and I intend to build on this research for future chapters of my dissertation, specifically by exploring this type of work at different scales and contexts. So particularly within the US context and in Kenya. So some questions I'm gonna ask around this are, how do national and international efforts integrate with on-the-ground community-led efforts, and what forms of knowledge are integrated into that? And ultimately, I want this to bridge these insights for more effective and inclusive conservation. So with that, a big thanks to everyone who's supporting me along this way, and I'll pass it over to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Our next speaker is Shauna Woody. And now when my predecessor and the former holder of the Olajos-Goslow chair, Tom Sisk, retired, Marcy Olajos, who will be delivering the closing remarks, kindly gifted some funds to NAU to create the Thomas D. Sisk Endowed Graduate Fellowship. And that was to support the training and development of future conservation leaders in the Southwest. And we're very lucky to have Shauna as our first Thomas D. Sisk Graduate Fellowship holder. Shauna is from, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, from the Rama Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. And her master's research focuses on how bison on the North Rim affect pollinators and flowering plants. And Claire Aslan, the head of School of Earth, of the School of Earth and Sustainability, is Shauna's primary supervisor. So take it away.
Thank you, Duan. Hooves and hives, the link between bison and pollinators. This project is supported by the Resilient Conservation Lab, as well as the United States Forest Service, the United States Park Service, the USGS, as well as NAU here. So a little bit about me. I earned my bachelor's degree from Fort Lewis College, and now I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in environmental science in the School of Earth and Sustainability. I'm under the mentorship of Claire Aslan, and I'm also under the mentorship in the Resilience Conservation Club with Duan. I am very blessed to be here. So about me, who am I, right? I fill a bunch of different shoes. I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a girlfriend, I'm an aunt. I used to be a college athlete, but the shoes that I love to fill the most, the one that I think is my life calling, is being an explorer, is being a researcher. And just not that, being an indigenous researcher, indigenous explorer. is what I feel like my passion is, how I got to this point of why I'm in the School of Earth and Sustainability. So in that, I grew up here in the Southwest. So when Claire came to me about a project here in the Southwest, I said yes without a doubt, because this is my home. These are my people in this area, right? So has anybody been to the North Rim of the Grand Canyon here? Yeah, awesome. So you guys know about the single road there and back. And for those of you who don't, I will try my best to show you guys and teach you guys a little bit about the uniqueness of the Kaibab Plateau. Sitting at an elevation of 6,000 and up to a peak of 9,000, it's a very unique place in the fact that there are only certain places here in Arizona that can reach that altitude. Specifically, the geological significance of this area has created a unique dynamic in the vegetation and the species that exist on this plateau. There's a Kaibab squirrel that only exists here. There's a Kaibab penstemon that only exists here. And recently they discovered a butterfly that could possibly only exist on the Kaibab plateau, right? And in 1906, bison were introduced by Bison George. He introduced 86 bison to this unique area that had its own dynamic. Bison in themselves are keystone species, as we all know. They're also an American heritage species in the fact that they have shown resilience in their populations from nearly being depleted to populations that now to like 500,000 populations now exist in North America. They provide decomposition. There are so many benefits from the way that they trample, from the way that they graze. They may not have they could have direct impacts. They are part of the system. They are now part of the Kaibab system, the dynamics. So they belong there now, you could almost say. Bison have been studied on their impacts of grazing. They prefer grasses, which potentially could lead to more forbs, which is a benefit to pollinators, right? So my study is about the Kaibab Plateau and the bison. So here's a map of Arizona and the Kaibab Plateau. I have study sites throughout the Kaibab Plateau that both go into the National Park and the National Forest. I have 19 sites. And within those sites are these exclosures that were built from a grad student from Colorado, the University of Colorado. And in these exclosures, I'm comparing what's happening inside of them and outside of them, right? And so my research question is, how does the presence of bison on the Kaibab Plateau affect diversity and abundance of pollinators and flowering plants, right? And so I'm gonna tackle this question by collecting data. And this is the type of data I'm collecting from baselines, beltline transects. Gotta really just doing an ecological analysis on what is the habitat there, what are the actual dynamics there, the stability, what kind of plants actually exist here, right? So I want to look by using all of these methods, ecological methods, to figure out these dynamics. Sweet, and I can't do this alone. I literally can't, and that's where citizen science comes into play. We got stuck here for like 3 hours, and I couldn't have gotten unstuck without the help of people, right? These plants, these pollinators, they need help. Who's speaking on their behalf? Can I be the voice? Can I be the person that helps this conservation show resilience against changes happening on the Kaibab Plateau, especially with climate changes? How can I make an impact in understanding these dynamics, right? And I have gotten involved. I've gotten students over the summer to be involved. I actually had a conservation class come out and collect data for me. So I work with all these people, and I work on this plateau, and I work with bison and observing pollinators and documenting plants, all for the conservation of this area. And more so, my project is still developing. I am a first-year master study student, and so how do I incorporate policy into this? Maybe some ways to incorporate it is through habitat protection for pollinators. public awareness, and promoting citizen science, suggestions on new management practices for the future, and definitely creating spaces to promote healthy discussion, because in my short time working on this, I've heard bison are not good, bison are good. So maybe me being able to step up to the plate and allow and create the space to have healthy discussion is really important for the success of the diversity on this Kaibab Plateau and with the existence of bison. And with that, I'd really like to thank the Conservation Resilience for supporting me, Claire for believing in me from the first time I met her. And I just really want to thank all of you guys for coming today and supporting this awesome group here. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Shona. Our next speaker is Anurati Jayasinghe. Anurati is registered for her PhD at Griffith University in Australia through a partnership we have with them. And Anurati's research in her PhD focuses on strengthening human-elephant coexistence, especially for marginalized rural communities whose voices are not often heard.
Thank you, Duan. Thank you everyone for being here. So once again, I'm Anurati Jayasinghe. I'm originally from Sri Lanka. To begin with, I completed my bachelor's in Sri Lanka on agriculture and then jumped into some university and NGO projects to provide some room for the marginalized communities, especially small-scale fisher communities and farmer communities who are affected by development projects. And then I voted with Australia Awards and I completed my master's in Australia at the University of Queensland. And now I'm a second-year PhD student at Griffith University. Today, I'll be presenting you all some of the results and progress of my PhD research towards inclusive human-elephant coexistence. To begin with, coexistence is dynamic but sustainable state where wildlife and humans are living together in shared landscapes. While this happens, the coexistence happens, it has to be governed by effective institutions. Coexistence is affected or influenced by various factors, but for this research, I'm grouping those influential factors into social contexts, which will be comprised of values, norms, and knowledge. So in the meantime, institutions to govern these interactions, human-wildlife interactions, can be categorized from individual values up to international standards. So for this research, these institutions will be regarded, the institution for this research will be regarded as IUCN Green List standard. And so my argument for this research is, for these institutions to be effectively governing these human wildlife interactions, they have to be embedded with social contexts. So to see whether these institutions are embedded with social context, I'll be conducting an ethnographic study in Sri Lanka. So these three will be my three data chapters, which I'll be explaining further in coming slides. So first, I have done a systematic review followed by critical interpretive synthesis to understand value pluralism in human-wildlife interactions, whether it helps to enhance coexistence. Value pluralism, to simply put in, having different value sets towards coexistence with wildlife. So as a result of this systematic review, I came up with the framework that you're seeing here. The value pluralism is leading to three non-exclusive relationships that are positive, ambivalent, and negative relationships. And this framework describes how to go beyond dichotomies of these relationships. And the manuscript for this chapter is already done and is under review in Conservation Letters Journal. So second, to identifying and addressing the gaps in the IUCN Green List standard with the institution I mentioned in the previous slides for human-wildlife coexistence, focusing on power relations in marginalized rural communities in Global South, I conducted another systematic review and identified three themes: the governance, social impacts, and complex systems. And then I identified a series of challenges, which will then be reviewed against the sample means of verifications and indicators of the IUCN Green List, which Emily, the first speaker, has also talked about. IUCN Green List Standard is a global program to improve the performance of protected areas. The next step for this chapter will be performing a series of interviews with green conservation experts. Next up is my ethnographic study, which I will be starting in 2 weeks' time in Sri Lanka. So I have selected Walsapukal village in southern part of the country. This village is in close proximity to 3 national parks. And also the village is a hotspot of human-elephant conflict in the country. And I'm planning to be in the village for 3 months to conduct my research. These 4 pictures here, including this GIF, and this one is actually downloaded from Google, but this is very common in Sri Lanka. This is from Sri Lanka, it's very common. And this picture is the family which I will be staying with for my ethnographic study. And this is what one of the consequences from elephant attacks, damaging crop raiding, and also damaging houses. So this lady here in this picture is same as here. They are building up some electric fences together with the villagers. So this is very common incident happening in Sri Lanka daily basis. So I'll be doing an ethnographic study following with participant observations and focus group discussions. And I'm planning to do nearly 10 focus group discussions with 10 participants each. So at the end of my research, I'm planning to develop a roadmap towards resilient human-wildlife coexistence, which will have insights into Arizona and US Southwest. Meanwhile, I'm having discussions with Emily, the first speaker, and also the one to how to bring my insights from Sri Lankan studies into Arizona and US Southwest. And thank you very much, Duan, and also Olajos-Goslow chair for co-funding the fieldwork, and also my supervisors from Griffith, and my PhD, or the cost is covered by RTP and Griffith University Postgraduate Research Scholarship, and also the Rafford Foundation for the funding for my fieldwork. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you so much, Anu. Our final speaker for the afternoon is Gabby Sekira. Gabby is a master's student here at NAU, and her master's research is focused on community priorities for rangeland restoration. And as you will see in Gabby's talk, her field work is west of South Africa's Kruger National Park, where I grew up. And so it's really exciting to be working with you on that.
All right. Hi, guys. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to my lab group colleagues for sharing their work. And thank you to Duan for giving us the space to talk. My name is Gabrielle Sekira Lucero, or Gabby, and I'm super excited to share with you my thesis work. So the project that I'm working on, it revolves around participatory restoration, which is environmental restoration that prioritizes the voices of the community. I'm also looking at bush encroachment, which is when woody plants take over a grassland area, and the rural livelihoods of the people in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, specifically in the Sabi Sand catchment area, which is the watershed between the Sabi and Sand rivers, which I'll show you a map of in a minute. I'm partnering with the Skakuza Science Leadership Initiative, the South African National Parks, the Sasani Trust, and the Organization for Tropical Studies to conduct this research. So I got into participatory restoration through my undergrad when I came up from Phoenix to NAU to get my Bachelor of Arts in Environmental and Sustainability Studies with an emphasis in global sustainability and minors in international studies and Arabic. During that time, I was able to live abroad in Egypt for 6 months, where I started my graduate work and contributed to a research project on decentralized solar energy in Yemen. I'm currently working on my Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Policy, as well as a graduate certificate in Public Administration. And I recently went through a facilitation training with the Southwest Decision Resources Organization, which was great for this research that I'm going to be doing. So what is the issue that my research hopes to address? If you can see over here on this map of South Africa, over in that upper eastern corner is the Kruger National Park. And right outside of that national park, in this little red box here, are a lot of historically underserved, impoverished communities. These communities are rural, relying on agriculture and cattle ranching and their rangelands for their livelihoods. And these lands have been degraded more and more over time due to things like overgrazing, wildfire suppression, and bush encroachment. And yeah, as you can see in this last picture, it might look great to have more tree cover in this area, but in these grassland ecosystems, having this more tree cover is actually bush encroachment, which is detrimental to the area because it contributes to these higher intensity fires because there's much more wood to burn. It decreases the biodiversity of the area because of the wildlife that rely on the grassland environments to survive, as well as consuming more of the already scarce water resources. So if you know anything about Kruger National Park or this area, you might know that there's already a lot of really great conservation work being done here. I'm really excited to actually be going this next week to meet some of the conservation researchers and community leaders and just get a better feel for the area before the study next summer. But yeah, so because of the focus on conservation in this area, there's been a lot of studies and restoration attempts here already, especially because of how important the Sabi and Sand Rivers are to the Kruger National Park. These studies and restoration attempts, while they collected all of the good data they needed on geology, hydrology, the botany of the area, all of that, these studies did not take into consideration the local community's perceptions and unique views on the challenges for restoration. And in the long term, these restoration attempts were not successful or sustainable. The theory that I'm working with, participatory restoration, would say that these attempts were not successful because of the disconnect between the local communities and the scientists. So participatory restoration argues that the quantity and the quality of participatory practices that you ingrain into your project, the higher level of, or the more successful your project will be in the long term. Some of these practices include things like having flexible goals in the restoration, having democratic conflict resolution, engaging the locals, and building trust. So how do I take these theories and apply them to the real life issues that we're looking at? So my research has 3 objectives. Firstly, to understand community members' values and their priorities for future restoration projects. Secondly, to understand their level of interest in restoration and the incentives that they would need to engage in these projects. And thirdly, to determine which strategies from past restoration efforts have been successful and we can use going forward. Back to our little map over here. If you see over here, if you can see that river going vertically, that is the Sand River, and to the south is the Sabi River, and in between those two is the catchment area. And these communities here comprise the study sites. And these are the sites that I'll be going to conduct interviews, surveys, and focus groups to feel out the community's perceptions on restoration, both past and in the future, as well as point out specific locations where degradation or restoration is more of a priority, and create a comprehensive timeline of the restoration and degradation events through the land's known history. In the end, we'll have a report that we can give then to local conservation organizations that will inform their restoration attempts as well as their interactions with the communities. There are a lot of connections between this project in South Africa and the things we face here in the Southwest, including things like water management conflicts, especially between ranching communities and conservation organizations, looking at wildfire intensity and prevention, as well as land degradation and desertification. And both areas benefit from rich Indigenous knowledge on environmental management in our respective areas. And yeah, so because of, or whether the project is in South Africa, or we're looking at things here in the Southwest, we can use the principles of participatory restoration to help engage people in environmental responsibility and increase the connection between local communities and the scientific community, which will, increase the success rates for restoration long term. I'm super excited for this project, and I welcome any feedback or questions that you have afterwards. And I will turn it back to Duan and Marcy for our final concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And Marcy,
Well, I have to tell you that the timing of this event could not have been better. I need to feel inspired and hopeful for the future. So thank you to the presenters who have shared their impressive work with us today. How great is it to have students from across the globe joining with students from the desert Southwest and sharing ideas and experiences as conservationists. It's just wonderful. And I want to also thank Duan for his continued enthusiasm as chair for this endowment. From the classroom to the field and beyond, it's about collaboration in land conservation and biodiversity protection. So I thank you for your vision, Duan, and I thank you all for being at this event today. It's been most inspiring. Thanks.
thank you, Marcy, for those kind words and the closing remarks. And thank you for being such a good colleague and friend to reach out to get input from on ideas, strategies, and there'll be a lot more of that in the near future, given the context
Absolutely.
we're now operating in, but there's opportunities and good things to be done. And I
Yes.
think international insights will help us do them. So now I'd like to invite all the speakers to come and stand here or there. Possibly here's better. And we have, thanks to all of you keeping wonderful time, up to 10 minutes for questions, either online. So Camille, you can't see what's online there, right? I can hopefully check it here. Yes, I can see it here. So so online or from the audience. No questions, people. Camille, you have a question. Wonderful.
I think you can all work together towards the same goal.
I think we are all working together towards the same goal right now. Prana, you are Shauna's supervisor. You participate kindly in our lab group meetings and contribute. Do you have any reflections you'd like to share?
No, definitely. I think you all did a great job to have a space like this, and I agree with Marcy. I think we all needed this, and I think thank you for all the inspiring work you're doing. And we collectively bring in a space which is inclusive, diverse, and welcoming. And I think from that comes a lot of friendships, partnerships. I especially loved how everybody, despite the diversity of topics, reflected upon how this all relates to the Southwest. So it kind of brings the story home, which is really, really great. Special shout out to Shauna. I mean, really, you brought in a great sense of energy and really appreciate it. Those are some thoughts. But, yeah,
Jason.
Thank you. That was really great. One of you mentioned 2-eye seeing as a way to incorporate indigenous knowledge, but many of you are seeking to do that. And so I'm curious about 2-eye seeing as the selected sort of paradigm to think about versus other possibilities as well.
Yeah, I think that was me.
Wait, can you repeat for the people online?
Oh, 2-eye seeing. So 2-eye seeing, which, yes, which is as a way, I'm going to try, as a framework and a concept to incorporate indigenous knowledge, because that's something that a lot of the presentations today talked about, and Meredith, you introduced it. And so that framework as opposed to others.
Yeah, I mean, I want everyone to speak on such a thing because I use it as an example, not so much as the main thing that's driving my research per se, but something I'm learning more about. But in terms of that, I think 2-eye seeing is a really excellent example of how we can bridge, braid, and weave knowledge systems for more inclusive and effective outcomes. And with 2-eye seeing, that's you know, I don't know how many folks are familiar.
Maybe introduce it briefly.
Yeah, I mean, like the gist of it, simply put, is two-eyed, right? So seeing one eye from a Western lens and another eye from an indigenous lens. I don't think a person like me can quite do two-eyed seeing, to be quite honest with you. I'm of settler ancestry, you know, I'm not indigenous to this place that I'm in. But I think we can do that through collaboration and partnerships, especially with such a diverse group like we have here. So I think that's just one way to be able to, really the concept of like bridging, braiding, and weaving different knowledge systems. But yeah, anyone else want to speak on that? I don't feel like this person. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? I see we have some former environmental science and policy as well as current students here, and so be interested. Any questions from you folk? Claire.
Sure. Amazing job, everybody. That was so great. And it was really fun to see how some of the projects have come along since I've been there before. Gabby, yours is completely different than last time I talked to you. That was fun. But I was curious, I mean, you are all doing such different things and you're all from so many different places. And I'm curious about being in a shared collaborative group right now. Maybe 2 or 3 members of the panel could tell me just like something really surprising you learned from each other related to your work.
I don't know about everybody else, but I know for me at least, it's been really cool to get to be part of this group, and I feel like it's helped a lot of my imposter syndrome. So like, to be fair, yeah, just hearing that like we're all doing similar work, and you know, helping each other learn along the way, and kind of trading ideas, and yeah, a lot of the theories and methods, we're all applying similar things, just to different areas of the world. And I'm actually really excited to see all of our results in the end, how they all kind of come together and what like our specific locations can learn from each other's projects.
Yeah, I think I can also add on to what Gabby has said. I think for me being part of this lab group, I think one of the key things that comes like really stands out is that I like to say as more as we think things change, they remain the same. So like as much as I'm coming from Africa, the context is so different, but just interacting with people, I'm seeing that in each of the individual components of what everyone is doing, I think there's a component which is also building up to my PhD. So like I hear someone speak about something, and at the end of the day, I'm going back researching and reading about it, and it's also like building up to the work which I'm also doing. So for me, that's collaborative approach, and just getting to hear different voices, because for me the voices I'm hearing are African voices. So just also hearing a different voice altogether just helps shape my perspective.
I also feel that this dynamic this group has really helped me in the imposter syndrome as well. But I think it's also lit like the passion about conservation, because when I see this panel, and I just feel this like really crazy burn right now in my heart hearing everybody's like studies, because I feel like I've always had a passion for conservation, but I've never had the opportunity, and being able to connect and collab and build on those skills and the way to think about conservation, I think it's like helping me.
Great, thank you so much. And any other questions from here or online or from the panel to other panel members?
Duan, I have a question.
Yes.
For Emily. I'm sure that you're aware of the reintroduction program of wolves in Colorado. There was recently a Rocky Mountain PBS production about that reintroduction, and the voices from the ranchers, the voices from Parks and Recreation, from scientists. And I wondered if you had thought of ever doing a similar type of production just to get information out to the public. I mean, there's all this contention and we hear from the ranchers, they're angry. We hear from the scientists, they don't communicate. In fact, in this program, the ranchers said that they're trying to be reasonable, but the communication between, the people who are in the reintroduction program and the ranchers hasn't been great. And so I thought that this show, reached, it's reaching a lot of people. And I wondered if there's any chance of doing something similar for Arizona.
Yeah. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm talking to the different camera, but yeah, I just saved that video. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm actually partnering with people at Colorado State University are on my committee through the Center for Human Carnivore Coexistence at Colorado State University. And so they have been working a lot on the introduction of wolves, and we've been following that. And I'm hoping to tie in those connections with them and what research they're doing and bring some of that back to the Southwest as well for Mexican wolves. There have been, over the years, there have been a number of documentaries made on Mexican wolves, but haven't had the reach quite as much as like a PBS show. But they do kind of make the film festival circuit, probably still reaching like the audience that, cares about wolves.
That would be pro wolf reintroduction anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are other graduate students doing some work specifically with ranchers here in the Southwest on like range rider research, things like that. So I'm definitely in touch with some other students and trying to figure out like how we're all, fitting the right niche to make some improvements. But yeah, I look forward to watching that video. I know Mireille Gonzalez, who's on my committee, she was interviewed for that as well. So you might have seen her, but and part of the landscape scale genetic model project, I'm hoping to actually look at the genetics of the Colorado wolf reintroduction and take those and like when and how Mexican wolves and the Colorado wolves might eventually meet up, because that's kind of a research need that currently the management plan is just to keep them separate and not let them interbreed.
Good luck with that.
Right? But that's really what we need for long-term conservation of wolves across the West, is for them to eventually reconnect. So hopefully we'll touch on some of those issues here too.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, it's on the stipulated ending time. So thank you so much, Marcy, again for the closing remarks. Thanks to the many people who joined online and to the people who came in person. And let's all enjoy some warm drinks and some nice, delicious snacks and talk some more to the panel. Thank you, everyone.